Well, we're halfway through January, which can only mean one thing. It's time for a fashionably late entry into the MacYac PowerPC Challenge, where we try to do as much of our day-to-day computing as possible on old PowerPC machines. And what better time to shove the latest version of OpenBSD 7.0 onto this 23-year-old iMac G3. Let's find out if running a lightweight modern OS on slightly outdated hardware can give us any semblance of a usable modern experience. Oh, and it's a heck of a fight to get OpenBSD running correctly on this thing. So stay tuned. And if you enjoy Unix-flavored shenanigans on purpley Macs, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. I have some really over-the-top shenanigans planned for a really rare Macintosh, so it's definitely worth sticking around. The PowerPC Challenge has been going on for a few years, and it's a pretty fun time. I'll link to the thread on Tinker Different down in the description. Last year, I decided to tackle gaming. We installed Adderley Linux on my PowerMac G5 and used it as a public Minecraft server for the PowerPC optimized version of Minecraft. Now, that's a pretty powerful machine, almost modern with its dual 64-bit processors, at least when running a modern 64-bit Linux. This year, I want to tackle limitation, which I think is the most interesting thing about this challenge. Specifically, just how far can you push extremely limited hardware if you give it a fully modern operating system? It's also a great excuse to pull out one of my favorite machines, this great iMac. And boy oh boy, is it limited hardware. It's a Revision D tray loader from the second run of iMacs after the original 1998 Bondi Blue.
What? It's Bondi. Bondi.
Right, Bruce. Sorry, I forgot. It's named after a beach in Australia. Bondi Beach. It has a 333 MHz G3 processor, and thanks to a broken RAM slot, it's limited to just 256 megs of memory. To put that into perspective, there's probably more RAM inside your Wi-Fi router, and a $5 Raspberry Pi Zero has double the amount of memory as this thing does. Not to mention the fact that it uses a 32-bit PowerPC architecture. The vast majority of operating systems, from Mac OS to most Linux distros, dropped support for it many years ago. On the Linux side, there's Adderley, Void, and a few older but still pretty modern versions of Debian and Ubuntu. And then there's BSDs, many of which are surprisingly still fully supported for 32-bit Mac PowerPC. Today we're going to be looking at OpenBSD 7.0 Mac PPC. Not only is it the latest release, actually just about 4 months old as of this filming, but it's also the easiest to install and get going on a PowerPC Mac, at least for the base system. In fact, I tried it on a whole bunch of my other PowerPC Macs, and I was stunned to see it detect all sorts of weird hardware options. It even configured this Sonnet wireless card right out of the box. But although the base system is incredibly easy to install with the guided walkthrough, which we'll see shortly, getting to a graphical desktop was not so easy. In fact, I had to manually configure Xorg, mostly going off of 20-year-old threads on various Linux forums for clues. And it was a tedious and frustrating experience. It took me like 9 hours of trial and error, and honestly, I almost gave up on it. I finally got it working at about midnight last night. Now, I was inspired by this blog post that I'll link below of someone with the same iMac G3 Grape tray loader who got OpenBSD working with graphics, and they provided their Xorg conf file, but unfortunately it didn't work on my Mac. I think they actually included the wrong version because it gave me a garbled screen. You know what isn't a tedious and frustrating experience though? Ordering custom PCBs from PCBWay.com. Famous for their fast turnarounds, as fast as 24 hours, and great pricing. PCBWay now offers many types of PCBs, including advanced PCBs with tighter tolerances, flexible PCBs, and lots of interesting solder mask colors. And if you've got fat fingers like I do, they even offer PCB assembly so you can save time on the soldering. So check out the link below to start your PCBWay.com quote, and you'll really help the channel in the process. So before we actually install OpenBSD on this thing, I do want to upgrade it with a bit of a modern nicety. We'll swap out that spinning hard drive with this nice SATA SSD and IDE SATA adapter. This will really help us out if we hit that 256 megabyte RAM limit, because we can have a fast swap partition to use as extra memory. Now, cracking this thing open is kind of a huge pain, so let's get to it. Now, this thing is a hefty beast, so we have to switch to patented Slippers Cam to take it apart. Now, it's been a while since I've taken this thing apart, and the last time I did, it was a real pain. Not as bad as I remember it, actually. So I just realized that this thing doesn't actually have a broken RAM slot, because the memory that's on top here is a 128 megabyte module, which means that there's a second 128 meg module on here underneath for the 256 meg. So technically I could increase this to probably 512. But I think in the spirit of this challenge, I'm going to keep it at 256 megs of RAM. Now this is the most annoying part. It's like a puzzle to get it out of here, because you have to slide back, up, and then forward on this stupid bracket. Just look at this yellow Molex. Isn't that just the worst yellow you've ever seen in your life? Gross. And I guess I should probably keep the original drive bracket in there just so I don't lose it. All right, time to install OpenBSD on an SSD in an iMac G3. That kind of sounds like a Draga 1 video. And now we see that lovely white on blue highlighting text that is characteristic of OpenBSD's boot screen. But we have our install, upgrade, auto install, and shell. So we hit I for install, and this literally just walks us through the whole process, just kind of hand holding us. So I guess BM0 is our Ethernet. We'll let it auto configure, and we're connected to the router. Pick some nice secure passwords. Start SSHD, yes. I am going to run X Windows. I do want it to start automatically. I'll set up a user. Nice secure password. Or allow root SSH login. No. Eastern time zone. And it sees our WD0 hard drive, so that's good. We'll let it do MBR, which is the default. And it looks like I had Adderley Linux installed on this SSD before, but we're just going to write over that. Hold disk. It automatically figures out a partition scheme. We'll just go with that. All right, we want to install from the disk. All right, well, now it doesn't see the CD-ROM. Okay, so I ran into some problems, and I'm going to cut a lot of it out because there was a lot of tedious trial and error. But what it boiled down to was this iMac G3 is extremely finicky when it comes to SSD adapters. And in fact, it didn't like this one, and didn't like this one, didn't like this one, or any of these adapters in this SSD. So I trial and errored basically every possible combination of all of these adapters and SSDs, and I took adapters out of other computers to try them. None of it worked. So what I wound up doing was going with a CF card in a CF to IDE adapter from startech.com with a 34 gigabyte CF card. It's not the solution I wanted to do, and I'm not sure if it's even that much faster than using the spinning disk hard drive, but at least it's silent, and it did finish the install. And you'll probably also notice that this CD-ROM drive is not the original. And that's because the original CD-ROM in here failed in the middle of filming, because of course it would. So I really channeled my inner Duraga 1, and I found this docking station for an ancient Gateway Pentium 3 laptop. Pulled the CD-ROM drive out of here. It's actually a CDRW, and that works in this thing just fine. But all of this is not the most annoying part. No. Let me show you how I got a graphical desktop on here, because that was the most annoying, tedious part. And it took me forever to figure out. Over 9 hours of text-based trial and error. And yeah, hopefully what I've done to make this work can help you if you're trying to get Xorg running on Linux or BSD on one of your old Macs with Rage 128 graphics. Okay, so in order to actually get a desktop, we have to configure the Xorg config. And to do so, we'll do su switch user and go into root. And I'll show you what you can do to easily set it up. CD, etc. X11. I wrote, after much trial and error, an xorg.conf that works, and I've put it up for download. So you have to add the wget application, and then you can just download the one that I've pre-configured, and it should work, at least on your Rage 128 equipped iMac G3. So now you can do wget, and it's on the FrogFind server right now. I might move it later. If I do, I'll put a redirect, but I'll always put the updated link in the description of this video. But if you do frogfind.com/files/bsd/xorg.conf, this will download the one that I've created. And once you download it and then restart, it'll boot right into the desktop. But let me show you what that file is. Basically, I had to trial and error through all of this configuration using things like forums from 20 years ago, threads with people trying to figure this out, xorg.confs that people posted for like Ubuntu 6 point something. And I finally got it to work, and it's using, unfortunately, no acceleration in the FBdev driver instead of the actual ATI driver, because that just doesn't seem to work. And when I try it with the ATI driver, I get a garbled screen. So I'm using FBdev, even though driver here says ATI. But if I reboot now, we should boot up right into the graphical desktop. And you know, I'm still getting some timeout errors on the CF card, so I'm wondering if even that isn't the best option for this super picky iMac. Oh, and I almost forgot. The last thing we have to do is actually boot into open firmware, Command Option OF, and we have to tell it to boot into BSD, which isn't very hard. So BSD is on our HD, which is the hard drive, so we can do setenv boot-device HD : ofw boot /BSD, and then do reset-all. And now it'll boot into BSD every time. All right, so now we can finally log in with our secure login credentials, and we'll be taken into the default OpenBSD desktop, which is FVWM. And it's a very minimal desktop environment, but also extremely usable. And I've made a few quality of life tweaks, mainly around the colors here in Xterm, so we can see what we're doing. And I've also installed a little bit of software such as NeoFetch, which is obligatory, of course, which shows that we are indeed running at 333 megahertz on our PowerPC G3 750. Very cool, and we apparently are only using 83 megs of our 256 megs of RAM for this full responsive desktop environment. Pretty cool. Now, I like FVWM quite a lot. It's kind of like if Windows 3.1 was modern. The entire background is actually the start menu here. But I did install a couple things, including some web browsers. So first we have Dillo, which is an extremely basic web browser. No JavaScript, very lightweight, but it does have modern SSL, so we can go to modern websites. So here's HTTP Google, we can do HTTPS. And yeah, we can get onto modern websites just fine. Let's try the orange site that people love to hate. And actually, let's pull up a program called HTOP that I've installed so we can just keep an eye on our memory and processor usage. Yeah, we're only using 8% of our 333 megahertz processor right now. Smoothly browsing the internet. Look how nice and smooth this is. Maybe not perfectly rendered, but hey, it's okay. Hacker News renders all right. But let's try a little bit of a better web browser, in my opinion. And that's called NetSurf. And can I just say, I am completely shocked by how smooth and fluid this desktop is. Look, here's NetSurf. This is a comparatively very heavy application. But yeah, we're still doing pretty well, not even using really half of our available 256 megs of RAM. We haven't even delved into the swap space yet. And this browser does support JavaScript. It's turned off by default, but it is much more modern. We have a much more modern looking Google. And yeah, it's showing us the mobile site, probably because our screen resolution and this window size is pretty small, 1024 by 768 on this iMac. But yeah, look how well this scrolls. Pop into Hacker News here, again, the orange website that people love to hate. And look at that. Rendered as if this was a modern PC. And I saw an article on here a while ago. There it is. Life at 800 megahertz. Let's pop into the comments here. See how well that loads. Yeah, we do spike up to 100% processor usage, but we're still only at 160 megs of memory. All right, so it took about 30 seconds to load into the comments here, but look at that. I mean, it's not the smoothest scrolling experience that I get on my modern MacBook Pro, but this is a totally usable experience. I have to be logged in to vote, evidently, and I'm not going to do that. Yeah, so let's take a look at this article. I was reading this a little bit earlier, and it was right up my alley. Life at 800 megahertz. Yeah, so this person is blogging about using a Sony Vaio VGN P588E 800 megahertz 32-bit machine with Linux as their daily driver. I just thought it would be pretty funny to look this article up on Hacker News on our 333 megahertz iMac G3 running OpenBSD. And yeah, I don't think we're going to get video working surprisingly well on this machine, but for consuming web content and in the spirit of the PowerPC challenge, this is a usable experience. Okay, let's do something real heavy here. Let's go to Reddit. We'll do old.reddit.com, and I don't know how this is going to go. Hey, look at that. Less than 20 seconds to load into https old.reddit.com. We've got no JavaScript enabled. And it loads just fine anyway. Resize the window here. Let's let it recalculate the DOM. Yeah, that was super fast. Look at this. Scrolling through Reddit just fine. And oh man, there's lots of politics on here, so yeah. Great website experience, but depressing content. Okay, let's try a real cool website here. tinkerdifferent.com. Yeah, so loads, again, less than 30 seconds. We did max out at 100% CPU. Seems to be almost done processing. Totally done, 45 seconds to render the entire page. Granted, again, without JavaScript. And this, of course, is the home of the PowerPC challenge, and we can go into the thread itself. Okay, so I really enjoy the FVWM window manager here, but I recognize that not everyone likes such a minimalistic experience. So I've actually already installed IceWM, which is a much more modern, but still extremely lightweight window manager. So let me pull it up and show you just what kind of really modern, good-looking experience you can get on this OpenBSD. So this is IceWM in its default configuration, and it might look a little simplistic, but there's a lot of power and configuration hiding just beneath the surface. The default IceWM is kind of configured to look like Windows 95, honestly, maybe a little hacker version with the little green clock over here. But there are a ton of themes. So if I open up a nice little X terminal here, look how smooth this is. I mean, Mac OS 9 is about this smooth, but this is a modern operating system. And if we run htop, we're only using 125 megs of memory and 5% of the CPU, well, going up to a lot more if we start dragging the window around. But say this early 90s motif is not your style. Well, this comes with a ton of themes. So we're on the default theme right now. My favorite theme is Nano Blue. Yeah, check this out. How cool does this look? And again, we're only using 128 megs of RAM, and this is a very slick looking modern operating system with 4 desktops that we can switch through. We can pull up our applications through a normal kind of start menu here. Pop up our NetSurf web browser. And yeah, this is a good looking theme and a very shockingly responsive desktop experience. I mean, this is really blowing my expectations completely out of the water. This is so responsive, so modern, and honestly good looking. I mean, trying to run Leopard on a 1 gigahertz Mac is way slower than running this completely modern 2021 OpenBSD on this 333 megahertz G3. Look at that. Look how smooth it is. And it's formatted correctly. I can't get over it, honestly. It's so good. It's so good. So what have we learned here today? Well, 2 very important things. One, if you're ever tempted to try and put an SSD into one of these original iMac G3s, don't bother. It's a huge headache and you're probably better off with the original spinning disk hard drive. 2, and most importantly, OpenBSD is amazing. I mean, if I can get this much performance and usability out of this limited hardware, imagine what OpenBSD can do on something like a Raspberry Pi or a server or even your primary computer if it's a little bit old. I mean, I'm browsing the modern internet with modern SSL and this thing, well, it breaks a little bit of a sweat, but it's perfectly usable. If you're gonna put like a Minecraft server on your Raspberry Pi, you're gonna get a lot more bang for your buck using OpenBSD, and it's stable and it's secure. It's amazing. So if you happen to see your local BSD developer, please tell them thank you. We appreciate your hard work on this incredible bit of software, and we really appreciate that it's still available on our beloved PowerPC. But that'll do it for today's video. If you liked it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more Macintosh shenanigans like this, please subscribe down below, and thank you very much for watching. And a special thanks to Camilla Noseda, Chris Allegretta, Chris Calderon, Chris Nelson, that's a lot of Chris's, David Teglovics, Greg Hrutke from Hrutke Mods, John Malman, Nick Hamsey, who are my highest tiered patrons, and all of my Patreon supporters for helping to make these videos possible.